My true story from Colorado. At my son's baby shower, my husband whispered, "We have to go, now." 10 minutes later, I learned what everyone else had known for months, except me. The drive home that evening felt endless, though the streetlights slid by in a familiar rhythm. My hands trembled on the fabric of the seat. Richard didn't speak. He just kept his eyes on the road while I tried to steady my breath, as though I were a patient I'd once treated. He said, caught in a sudden fit of anxiety. Then the phone buzzed against my thigh. I looked down to see a text from Dr. Karen Liu, the doctor I had once collaborated with at the CDC. She had sent a photo, the same slide from the shower, the one I watched change before my eyes. But this version was labeled clearly, Evelyn Ferrer, removed from lineage, replaced by Jane Abbott. The image stung like salt in an open wound. I stared at it for minutes before finally looking up at Richard. He glanced over, knowing that I had read the message. His jaw clenched as the world around me seemed to tilt again, only this time toward undeniable truth. My throat felt tight. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to swallow the wave of betrayal that filled me. I opened my mouth and closed it. Words would come later. When we pulled into the driveway, I stayed in the car for a moment longer. I traced the edges of the photo with my finger. Dr. Liu had written, "Did you know they replaced you?" followed by a series of angry emojis. My lips trembled. That photo was evidence, but it also cut me open. It showed how thoroughly I had been erased. Inside, I thought back to the day I saved my son's life. Peter was 2, fevered and weak, blood pressure dropping dangerously low from a complication we didn't even understand. I took the needle and transfused his blood myself, in our living room, with trembling hands and a prayer. I remembered his tiny fingers gripping mine as he drifted in and out of consciousness. I remembered his face when he woke and blinked at me, then smiled, and I promised never to stop keeping him safe. Now I believed that promise hadn't mattered to them. They were more concerned with the image, the brand. I had been cast aside for something prettier, safer, easier to show off. As I walked into the house, the lights were dim. Emmy was asleep upstairs. Richard dropped the phone onto the kitchen island and took my hand. I could feel the warmth trembling through his palm. He led me to the living room, gesturing for me to sit. Silence hung heavy between us. I closed my eyes and let the breath come in slow, controlled waves. When at last I spoke, my voice sounded strange to me, deep and quiet, like a river that runs under ice. "They replaced me," I said. "They replaced me, Richard." He squeezed my hand loud in the hush and said nothing. But I understood. A storm was building. In the days that followed, I could not forget the photo. I traced my thoughts along its edges, asking myself why Lisa and Jane would go to such lengths. Why would they erase me from the baby's family tree, especially when they had needed me the night Lisa nearly lost the pregnancy? I remembered how the doctors had come to me in private, asking me to confirm the source of the rare E47 antibody I'd once studied. They told me the placenta had stopped producing coagulation factors, and that without my cells, Peter's child might not survive. I remembered how I'd given blood, or cells, or hope. Something inside me, some tiny protest, whispered, "I am not just a placeholder. I am not easily replaced." Lisa had justified it once, in an offhand conversation after we talked about family story. She'd turned to me, her voice cold and careful. "Your genetic history might look cute on a scrapbooking site, but for marketing purposes, it's a liability. We have to present a clean pedigree." I'd thought it was idle chatter until tonight, when I saw it was a strategy. I raided my old files the next morning. I found the hole. The prenatal records had my name on them, showing the samples were taken from me. Then, 2 days later, there it was in black and white. A memo from the consulting firm. Recommendation: shift maternal lineage reference to maternal side. Remove extraneous genotypes. Signed by an assistant. A consultant. A strategist who didn't know the blood that courses through my veins. I handed the documents to Richard. He read them with a shock so deep it changed his posture. I watched his face grow hard with anger, but also with resolve. I did not feel fear. I felt breath, the steady kind that told me, this matters. Not just because they erased me, but because they erased the truth of who I was. In the evening, Richard and I sat at the kitchen table. No pain, only purpose. We made a plan. We would go to Dr. Liu. We would gather documentation. We would proceed deliberately, quietly. We would not accept illusion as our story. We would rewrite the record. Later that night, I lay in bed next to Richard. Darkness pressed in, but instead of fear, I felt something like promise. The past was hurtful, but it was not yet settled. I still had breath. My story was still in motion, and I still had a place at the table. The road home from the baby shower was lined with twilight and silence. Neither Richard nor I spoke, the hum of the engine filling the vacuum where conversation might have lived. My hands rested in my lap, motionless, but inside me something was beginning to move, a quiet storm gathering along the edges of my dignity. Halfway through the drive, my phone buzzed. A message. I hesitated. My fingers trembled as I reached for it. It was from Karen Liu, an old colleague of mine from the CDC days. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but we had once shared a lab bench and late-night coffee during a particularly long outbreak study in Denver. I opened the text. It was a photo of the slide from the baby shower, the genetic map, except this one was annotated. Her message read, "Did you know they erased you? Evelyn, your name is gone." I stared at the screen. The diagram was crisp, professionally made, the name Jane Abbott positioned in the place where Evelyn Ferrer should have been. A red circle had been drawn around it in digital ink. Maternal lineage, source, Jane Abbott. Verified. I said nothing. I did not even gasp. I simply stared. I knew then what they had done. They had replaced me. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, biologically, publicly, in front of guests, family, strangers. They had redrawn the map of my family and erased my name from the roots. Richard glanced over. He saw the color drain from my face. "What is it?" he asked. I showed him the screen. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. 10 minutes later, I sat on the edge of our bed, holding the echo of betrayal settle into my bones. Richard paced the hallway, cursing under his breath, but I was already somewhere else. I was remembering the afternoon Peter collapsed in the hallway when he was just 2 years old, fevered, seizing, his small body limped in my arms. The ambulance had taken too long. The hospital was overwhelmed, so I did what I had to do. I rolled up my sleeves, I found the kit, I matched his blood. I sat on the floor of our living room, my knees aching, and held the line steady while my blood entered his veins. He lived. Because I did not panic. Because I was his mother. Years later, when Lisa was in her second trimester and began experiencing complications, elevated clotting, signs of immunological rejection, I had offered my history, my records. I had even been tested again at their request. That was when they discovered the E47 variant in my blood, a rare immunogenetic sequence I had helped study decades ago, the same one that was now being investigated as a possible treatment path for placental autoinflammation. I remembered how the OB team had quietly thanked me, how I had signed the waiver, how I had been assured it would remain private, but now, not only had they used me, they had hidden me. In my place, they had installed Jane, Lisa's mother, a woman who had never lifted a hand in crisis, who had once laughed at the term bioethics, who had said at our last Thanksgiving, "Some trees just need pruning from the top down." I had been pruned, deleted, not for science, for optics. I closed my eyes and remembered another conversation, one that Lisa probably thought I had forgotten. We were sitting in the sunroom, and she was flipping through parenting magazines while I watered the succulents. She had said, "We're working with a publicist now. The baby's arrival is going to be announced through the bank's PR department. It helps to show strong roots, clean lines, no messy history." I had asked, gently, "What's messy about my history?" She smiled like it was a joke. "Oh, Mom, you know, the hypertension, the thyroid thing. It's just complicated." I nodded then, smiled even, pretended I understood. But now I understand. Now it was clear. I was not photogenic enough to remain in the lineage, not profitable enough, not convenient. Richard returned to the room. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We should say something," he said. I shook my head. "Not yet." He sat beside me. "They think we're old," he said after a moment. "Easy to rewrite. I looked down at my hands, hands that had stitched clothes, held babies, cleaned wounds, typed theses, and held trembling sons. I thought of my blood, typed, cross-matched, coded, essential. Then I looked up. They made a mistake, I said quietly. Richard raised an eyebrow. They forgot, I whispered, that I kept the originals. He frowned. The records? I nodded. And the consent forms, the antibody report, everything. His eyes widened. You still have that? In the lockbox, I said, the one under the bed. I never throw away anything that has my blood on it. His breath caught. We sat in silence for a long while, and in that silence something hardened inside me. Not bitterness, not rage, just resolve. They could erase me from a slide, but not from history, not from the truth, and certainly not from the blood that had saved my son, and might once again save his child. That night, I did not sleep. I gathered my records, I made copies, and I began to prepare. They had replaced me. Now I would return the favor, with fact, with science, and with something they could never replicate: the truth. The reception hall felt even colder the second time I walked through its doors. Lisa had already raised her glass. Her voice rippled through the crowd as she made a toast to a bright, healthy future. I paused at the threshold, Richard's arm steadying me. My knees might have shaken, but my expression was calm, deadly calm. I took one slow breath and stepped forward. Conversations hushed. Forks clinked against plates, what little etiquette remained in that room. I felt their eyes on me, some alarmed, some amused, some openly scornful. Then Richard cleared his throat. His voice carried through the silence. The person who was removed from that genetic slide tonight is the person who gave her blood, her antibodies, and her love to keep this child alive. A gasp escaped the crowd. Lisa's smile faltered. Jane's perfectly coiffed face tightened. Peter, seated beside her, jumped to his feet. His face turned red, voice trembling as he shouted, "That old man deserves a medal or something?" He pointed a finger at his grandfather. "He's just manipulating us. If you two can't behave, get out." The words landed like a thunderclap. I watched Richard hold his ground, muscles coiled. He looked at Peter with sympathy, then at Lisa. Without flinching, he said, "This is not manipulation. It is the truth." A hush fell, and then Lisa laughed, a crisp, cutting laugh that froze the air. "Oh, spare us," she said. "If you two don't know when to shut up, we'll just erase you from the will entirely. Consider this your foreclosure notice." Her words landed like a strike, and the crowd tensed. Jane tipped forward elegantly and stepped between Lisa and Richard. Her hand landed on his arm, light as lace but firm in its aim. "If you'll switch sides," Jane purred, eyes on Richard, "I promise you'll be reinstated in family documents. The lineage will be clean again. No scandal, no embarrassment, no Evelyn." I felt my heart pound, but I said nothing. Richard pulled his arm free. His voice was as sharp as a blade. "I don't need a lineage that hides who saved its future. I need the woman who did it, no matter how inconvenient." He stepped toward me and took my hand. The gesture was simple, yet powerful. He chose me. Peter sank back into his seat. Lisa's jaw clenched. Jane's eyes flickered with annoyance. In that moment, the stage they had prepared collapsed under the weight of exposed truths and moral clarity. Without another word, Richard and I turned and walked out. I held my head high. I felt the weight of every lectern and podium they had tried to prop up behind us begin to crumble. My dignity felt stronger than any chair or invitation. That night I reopened an old file cabinet in my study. Inside, I had locked away the original prenatal records, the CDC correspondence about the E47 antibody, the signed consent forms, even a vial of my tested blood sealed and frozen. One by one, I took them out and arranged them on the desk. There were printouts of lab reports, emails from the hospital, affidavits I had gathered during that terrifying time when the baby trembled in utero. I pulled each folder closer until my hands trembled as I touched them. I ran my fingers over the labels: Ferrer, Evelyn, Gene History, CDC, K, the confirmation confrontation, consultant memo, remove Evelyn. In the quiet of that room, I felt the history of my life spread out before me, a testament to love, sacrifice, and betrayal. I had given my blood to save a child. They had removed my name to protect an image. Never again. Tomorrow, the real work begins. The next morning, I awoke before dawn. The air in our house was heavy, as if it waited for me to act. Richard slept beside me, but I couldn't rest. I slipped on my slippers and made my way to my old study, a room I hadn't used in months, not since the baby shower. Inside, I found the file cabinet I had locked and mostly forgotten. Its doors slid open with a familiar creak. I pulled out the thick folder labeled Ferrer Evelyn Gin History. Beneath it lay a sealed envelope marked CDC, KLIU, confirmation, several hospital lab reports, and an email printout from the consulting firm with the words "Remove Evelyn" circled in digital red. I took a deep breath and laid everything out on the desk. First, the slide contract showing that Lisa had hired a private genetic consulting firm to redesign lineage materials. I read through the agreement. Nearly $10,000, 0 cents, for event brand optimization. I traced the clause. Client may request alteration of maternal lineage for public representation purposes. There it was. In black and white, they had purged me from their carefully constructed story. Then, I thumbed through the hospital records, the blood work during Lisa's unstable pregnancy, the OB note, Mother Ferrer, rare E47 antibody identified, deemed essential to patient care. The lab noted a slight risk of Rh coagulopathy, but instead of crediting me, Lisa had directed them to attribute the sample to her own mother, Jane Abbott. I felt a wave of nausea. I had given of myself, not for recognition, but to protect a child whose life now dangled between secrecy and science. And they turned that into a branding decision. Across the desk lay slides and notes from a now-canceled medical conference Lisa was scheduled to join. The flyer read, Maternal Gene Sources in Fetal Development, a Public Case Study. Lisa's speaking points included Jane Abbott, hereditary lineage, and no complications in maternal xylocus, both demonstrably false. The points had been drafted by this same PR team. The genetic data was fabricated. They had taken my role, which had real impact, and replaced it with a fiction more palatable to their audience. The betrayal flashed, sharp and cold. At that moment, I decided I could no longer remain silent. This was not just my name erased. It was everything I had given, everything I had risked, and all that I still could offer to that new little life. I sat at the desk and made a list. File a formal complaint with the hospital's ethics board. Submit evidence to the medical licensing recertification for the OB team, contact the CDC to report misuse of confidential genetic data, prepare legal documentation for genetic rights and maternal recognition if needed. That list felt holy, as though each line carried my blood. Each step carried the chance to restore some part of what I had lost, and to ensure that this baby would never be harmed in another cover-up. Later that morning, while Richard made coffee, I called Dr. Liu. Karen, I said, I need your help. This is bigger than me. It's about science, ethics, a child's right to the truth. She answered within the hour, voice anchored in memory. Let me see what I can do. The CDC has data use agreements. They don't take kindly to manipulation. A storm was gathering. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital where Lisa had given birth. I requested a copy of the genetic sample chain of custody. The clerk looked hesitant. Such requests were unusual, but I was patient. I pointed to the signed release from a year earlier, original hospital documents listing me as donor of the E47 sample. My name was clear. Mine. I'd known then that I had leverage, not just maternal instincts, but proof. By evening, the slide contract and genetic data had been leaked to the head of the OB Ethics Review Board. That same night, the hospital launched an internal inquiry. I returned home after dark. Richard had left a single index card on my nightstand. Truth only lives when it stands unafraid. I realized it was time to plan my next move. At the next mandatory family dinner, an awkward event everyone pretended was about baby planning, I arrived prepared. Lisa began to gush about her professional gene presentation, then faltered when I stood and produced a printed copy of the official lab report. Dr. Evelyn Ferrer, I said, voice steady. The maternal donor of the E47 antibody sample, preserved in hospital records, signed consents, and chain of custody documentation. Your slide and your speech? Fabricated. The room went icy. Jane's cheeks were drained of color. Lisa blinked repeatedly. Peter looked from me to Richard, who stood tall beside me. Someone gasped. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. I held their shared silence, as though it were fragile glass. "What about the genetic narrative you made so public?" I continued. "Does it still hold when your mother didn't even donate the sample?" Lisa's voice shook as she whispered. "You don't understand the context," I cut in softly. "The context is, until the truth comes out, that baby could be denied care, tied to that antibody, even if unknowingly, and you, Lisa, risked her health and identity to keep the spotlight." Jane opened her mouth, but I raised a finger. "I am not this room's shame, but I did not have to be the villain either." Within 48 hours, a medical news site had published an anonymous tip, "Genetic ethics scandal at high prefacy baby event." By day 4, the hospital confirmed an ongoing review. By day 7, the consulting firm that had edited the slide was under investigation for unauthorized data manipulation and possibly violating state genetic privacy laws. At home, I sat in the study with Richard. He held my hand, his other hand wrapped around a steaming mug. I leaned into him. "They're going to come at us," I told him, "but this gets the truth out in the open." He nodded, voice quiet. "You did more than protect yourself. You protected a life." That was bravery. I closed my eyes and let the moment wash over me. Later that week, I visited the hospital labs and quietly met with the OB attending, Dr. Morales, the one who had come to me during Lisa's pregnancy to confirm the sample. "Dr. Ferrer," she said, guilt in her eyes. "We were told to reroute documents. We didn't know the details." I placed a hand on her arm. "Science was never your fault. You did what was right." She nodded and slipped me the signed lab log, proof that the sample had been recorded under my name. Walking home, I thought about how many other women had been erased from their own stories. Grandmothers, mothers, birthing parents, simply to uphold a narrative, not the truth. That night, we gathered around our dining table, not the one featured on the slide, but my old oak table. Richard set tea. I placed the lab log in front of me. He pressed his lips to my forehead. "Let's keep going," he whispered. I smiled, and I knew. The truth had been erased once, but now every record, every file, every testimony in my control was part of a rebuilding. They could draft better slides, they could spin better speeches, but they could never delete my place. In blood, in lineage, in truth, ever again. The morning sun streamed through my study window as I gathered the materials I had spent days organizing. Hospital lab logs, prenatal records, the original consent forms, Dr. Liu's emails, the slide contract, and the CDC letter confirming the genetic data. Each document carried weight. Proof that I had sacrificed blood and anonymity so this child could live. I arranged them on the desk like a mosaic, fragile but whole. Richard stood beside me as I picked up the phone. My hand was steady. "Emmy Law Firm," a voice answered. I spoke clearly, detailing what had happened. I described the erasure, the manipulation, the hidden agendas. I emphasized it wasn't just a familial slight. It was a breach of medical ethics, a violation of the baby's right to accurate genetic history. I arranged an in-person meeting. An hour later, we sat in a small office in downtown Denver. Across from me was attorney Sandra Myers, whose reputation for defending whistleblowers and ethical violations preceded her. She laid my documents on the table and scanned them. Her brow furrowed. She looked up at me with intense focus. "Mrs. Ferrer," she said, quietly at first, "this is not just compelling, it's damning." I nodded. She tapped the lab logs. "Proof you donated the E47 sample, clear chain of custody, signed consent. Then this slide, where you're removed from the maternal line. Then there's the PR memo, remove Evelyn, replace with Jane. That's premeditated. This goes far beyond your immediate family. It affects hospital protocols, public trust, even potential genetic research." She paused, placing her hand gently on the folder in front of me. "We'll file an official ethics complaint with the hospital, the state medical board, and we'll draft a civil suit against the consulting firm for defamation, data manipulation, and potentially violating genetic privacy laws. If we win, it will publicly condemn this behavior. It could destroy Lisa and Jane's credibility." The thought made my chest tighten, not from fear, but from righteous clarity. "We'll also petition for you to be granted medical guardianship for the baby. under the premise that a proxy for genetic history is essential for future care. Her final words hung in the air. You saved this baby's life with your blood. Now you'll protect her future with truth. That afternoon we filed the official complaint. Sandra prepared 4 separate documents, a formal submission to the hospital's Ethics Review Committee with all supporting documentation, a petition with the State Board of Medicine highlighting malpractice in genetic disclosure and data manipulation, a civil lawsuit naming the consulting company as defendants, citing defamation, emotional distress, and privacy violations under Genetic Privacy Acts, a petition for provisional medical guardianship, asserting that the baby's care required knowledge of her maternal genotype history. I signed each document. My pen felt heavier than expected, not from the ink, but from the significance of what I was doing. That evening, Richard and I sat at the kitchen table, drinking tea in silence. I watched him lift the cup to his lips, then set it down. "We're in motion," he said. I closed my eyes and let the concept land. There was no turning back. Over the next few days, news spread quietly within professional circles. Sandra received word that the hospital had placed Lisa's medical privileges under review, citing ethical misconduct. The state board opened a genetic review inquiry. The consulting company, feeling the legal heat, tried to retract statements and pull back the offending slides, but the documents were already in evidence. Anonymously, copycat leakers within the firm began sharing internal memos that confirmed what I already knew. This had been orchestrated to perfect a media narrative. I watched the press releases from a distance. I didn't chase headlines, I let them come. Meanwhile, we proceeded with the guardianship filing. In court, the judge noted the unusual nature of the request, but when Sandra presented the affidavit from the attending physician stating that accurate genetic information would be essential to the baby's future health, the judge acknowledged the merit. Conditional guardianship was granted, allowing me legal medical involvement until I chose to step away, or until the baby reached majority. I felt the weight of that pen on the final order. I had fought for more than respect. I had fought for her safety. That evening, Lisa called. I could sense her voice trembling on the line. "Mom," she said, tight and brittle, This isn't necessary. I can fix it. I listened without interrupting. Tears threatened to break like glass. When she paused, I spoke. "Do you understand why I had to do this?" Her voice cracked. "I just wanted the best for her." I closed my eyes. I breathed. She needs truth more than perfection. If there is no truth about her origins, her future doctors may miss vital genetic cues. I kept you alive. I will not watch her suffer for the sake of an image. The silence lasted too long. Lisa said, "I'm sorry." We both exhaled. But there was more to be done. A week later, we received notice that the consulting firm's lead attorney had requested settlement talks. The hospital had suspended Lisa's privileges pending review. Jane had stopped publishing genetic genealogy content. The media was circling. In a private meeting, Sandra advised caution. They may offer a settlement, public apology, financial compensation, promise of revised policies. Do not accept anything until we review it. That night, Richard and I sat by the wood stove. I unrolled the legal papers. Between us, we let the fire drift into the next room. Outside, snow fell in deep flakes covering the neighborhood in white hush. "Do you think I've made enemies?" I asked quietly. He took my hand and gave it a squeeze that echoed stronger than any courtroom. "You've made allies, among doctors, ethicists, and other mothers. You stood for something real. That's not a crime." I nodded, tears falling unnoticed. In the following days, Dr. Liu's department at the CDC conducted a preliminary investigation. They confirmed that unauthorized gender alteration slides and false maternal data had been distributed. They submitted the results to the state board. Louise from the hospital reached out to thank me. The medical director said, "Your evidence might save more than one family from genetic misrepresentation." I pressed a hand over my heart. 2 weeks later, Lisa and Jane called again. This time they spoke through Sandra. Their offer: a full retraction, a public apology, commitment to hospital policy changes, combined with no financial demand if I dropped the civil suit. Sandra reported back. "It's their first offer. It's strategic. Likely more will come. I discussed it with Richard. We weighed the decision. I thought of the baby, of the guardianship, of her life built on truth. I thought of every document, every tear, every molecule of blood I had given. I finally said, "We accept conditionally, only if the apology is public, the policy change is real, and our guardianship stands uncontested." Sandra nodded. A week after that, the hospital's press release went out. Lisa and Jane stood beside the hospital's ethics board, voices steady as they recited the statement. Acknowledgement of wrongdoing, assurance of revised genetic lineage policies, and gratitude to me for bringing the issue forward. Lisa's face was pale. Jane's eyes flickered with something, shame, regret, or fear. It was hard to tell. I watched from behind the cameras, holding Richard's hand. The baby slept in a bassinet nearby, unaware of the storm she had weathered before birth. In the aftermath, the consulting firm announced internal reviews, and 2 senior advisors resigned. The state board ordered a formal inquiry into slide manipulation. The hospital updated its consent forms to include maternal lineage representation clauses. And I looked down at the baby, her cheeks flushed in sleep, her tiny fingers curled. I let myself cry, not from victory, but from relief. Someone had finally seen me, not just erased me, and in that sight, I found a new center to stand on. A week after the slide scandal, I sat in the hospital chapel, the air thick with antiseptic and hushed prayers. The baby, tiny, fragile, lay in a warmed cradle in the adjacent ward. Doctors had warned that complications might still arise. Genetic anomalies could still reveal themselves. I watched the doorway every few seconds, afraid of what news might come next. Early one morning, the call came. I was back in my old jeans and cardigan, clothes I wore when I wasn't performing or testifying. My skin felt tight. Exhaustion had settled into my bones. Richard met me in the corridor. His face was calm but resolute. "The doctor wants you here," he said. "The baby's blood work, something unexpected." I did not speak. I followed him. In the sterile light of the neonatal ward, Lisa stood by the incubator, pale and uneasy. Jane leaned against the wall, her posture stiff, hands clenched. Peter hovered a few feet behind them, his face drawn and angry. An attending physician, Dr. Morales, met me with a nod. "Mrs. Ferrer," she said softly, "the baby's hemoglobin is dangerously low. We ran a genetic panel. We need to know the biological father for full risk markers. Can you help?" My breath caught. Everything settled. My fight, the slide, the guardianship, the scandal. It all funneled into this moment. I nodded once. Yes. Dr. Morales led us to a consultation room. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly. Moments later, the genetic results arrived. Lisa, Jane, Peter, all watched. Lisa's lip trembled as she whispered, "Is she?" Dr. Morales adjusted her glasses. "The tests confirm. The infant does not match Mr. Peter's genotype. Additional paternity testing reveals no paternal match." Silence. Time itself seemed to slow. Peter's face dropped. He stood, eyes wide. What? His voice was hoarse. "No, but how?" Jane went still, her jaw slack. Lisa sagged into a chair, tears forming, shock etched in her every feature. Peter spun on Lisa. His voice shook with disbelief that erupted into madness. "Are you a liar? A fraud? How dare you deceive me? Deceive a child?" He lashed out, tensed, then struck her across the face. It echoed in the small room. "I thought I knew you," he cried, voice cracking. "I wasn't even a father." Lisa's sobbing sobbed beneath the crack. And then I stood. I opened my bag and removed the folder. Inside was the baby's full genetic panel, along with my own DNA confirmation results. It showed that I shared the exact E47 allele essential for her blood clot stability. I laid both papers on the table and spoke softly but firmly. "I may not be her grandmother genetically, but I am biologically the source of the protective gene, the gene the doctors relied on to keep her alive through her crisis." Jane's face went ashen. Lisa buried her head in her hands. Peter staggered back against the wall, his expression one of raw realization. "Your genetic manipulation," I said, "left a void. You removed me from a system that was already working, one that was keeping this child alive, and now that void is showing." Dr. Morales exhaled slowly. "Without that allele, the child would have slipped into DIC. Let us say it plainly. Mrs. Ferrer saved her life." The room went still. I felt a tremble in my chest, my voice softened. To deny my motherhood, my part in giving her life, is to deny her right to continued care. Medical truth is not propaganda. Lisa looked up from her hands, tears glistening. She flinched when she saw me standing before her, teacher, grandmother, subverted hero. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice broken. Peter shook his head. This whole time, he stopped as if the words would break him. I stepped forward. "It's not too late to choose the truth." He looked at me, eyes reddened. Can you?" He squeezed his thumb into his palm. I nodded. "Yes." Lisa rose and knelt before me. "Please, Evelyn," she said, voice trembling. "Help me, help her." I looked at the baby, struggling but alive, and then at Lisa's tear-streaked face. I reached down and touched the baby's blanket. "I will." Later, the three of us emerged together. Grandmother, mother, hired mother, standing unified. The baby was stable. Genetic support protocols were activated. Lab markers shifted back toward normal ranges. The hospital mayoring nurse looked at all of us, perplexed but respectful. "Mrs. Ferrer, this is unusual, but thank you." We didn't speak as we were excited. Words were not needed. The child lived. Outside, the cool Colorado air was a balm. I breathed deeply. Peter walked beside me, his head bowed. "I don't know what to say," he whispered. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Start with the truth." He swallowed hard. Jane hovered near Lisa, silent. In the following days, the scandal erupted. Headlines read, "Baby not Peter's, genetic scandal rocks family, and child saved by grandmother." Senate committees even debated ethics in selective lineage. It was a whirlwind I never wanted, but I could not walk away. The baby depended on truth. Peter faced the cameras, voice trembling. "I was blind, my wife, our family lied to me and my child. I was wrong. I ask for forgiveness, from my wife, my mother, and from the child, and I promise I will live honestly from now on." Lisa lost her social profile. Jane retreated. But in a small room down the hall, I held the baby, tiny palm curled around my finger, and kissed her forehead. A month later, I sat at my oak desk, city lights twinkling outside. Richard poured 2 cups of tea. I placed my hand on the baby's bracelet, inscribed Evelyn. I pressed my free hand to my chest. I had been erased, disrespected, silenced, but I had not been broken. That gene, the one I carried, unknown and downplayed, had saved a life. And now, life was truth. Richard leaned in and whispered, "What will you do now?" I looked at the night sky, lights tracing the mountains beyond. My voice was clear, resolute. "I will make sure this never happens again. For every mother, every grandmother who could be erased. But matters just as much. Lives matter." He nodded. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I allowed relief to wash in. I had faced betrayal, genetic rejection, public betrayal, but I had also reclaimed my lineage, my dignity, and my voice. And at the end of it all, the baby lived. The late morning sun filtered through the patterned glass of our living room as a tense hush settled. The front door swung open and Peter stepped inside, shoulders slumped, face pale. Lisa stood nearly hidden behind him, silent and uncertain. Jane hovered in the background, stoic. Richard and I sat on the sofa, the air heavy with everything that had happened. Peter paused mid-step, swallowed, and then, in a moment that felt like time stopping, he dropped to his knees before us. Gravel crunched beneath his jeans. He bowed his head. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry," he whispered. His voice trembled with shame. "I lied. I lost my way. I hurt you both. Please, I beg for your forgiveness." Richard's eyes narrowed, with decades of disappointment and love mixed with pain. He rose slowly to his feet and stood before our son. In a calm, low voice he spoke. "Peter, you punched your own father, not just in anger, but in betrayal. Then you allowed your wife and your mother's blood donor, yes, that includes me, to be erased from her own child's lineage. You let them manipulate life's code for the sake of optics. You were ready to abandon your mother, the woman who risked her health to save your life when you were 2 years old." Peter's head shook. He buried his face in his hands. He looked broken. Richard shook his head, stepping back. "That's not forgiveness. That's closure." I stood, my hand shaking slightly at my side, each breath measured. Richard squeezed my hand. I looked at our son, the child I raised and loved. "Peter?" I said, voice quiet but firm. You were once my blood, my heartbeat. But when blood betrays the heart, it severs the connection. Tears brimming, I paused, letting my words settle. I sacrificed my youth, my health, to save you, even when it was hard. Even when the nights were long, and you nearly threw that away for a genetic vanity show. Peter lifted his eyes, voice cracking. Mom, please. I didn't know. I was so scared of being in the wrong family. I lost sight of what mattered. I breathed deeply. We gave you roots. We gave you life. But you have to live with the choices you make. We cannot allow those roots to be poisoned. I opened a folder and handed a document to Richard. He unfolded it. It states here that Peter relinquishes all inheritance rights, from property to bank accounts to symbolic inheritance, that were once his birthright. I drew in a breath. We have signed it, legally, permanently. This is not punishment. It's protection. For me, for our legacy, and for truth. Richard looked at Peter, his voice soft but resolute. No more threats, no more breaking trust. You are free to walk away. We are free to let go. Peter closed his eyes and shook his head. I never wanted this. I'm so sorry. Lisa stepped forward, voice choked. I tried to protect our image. I thought it would be easier. I didn't answer. I looked at Richard. He shook his head. Our decision stands, he said. Emmy, our adopted daughter, stepped into our home at that moment. She stood by our side, an unwavering presence. She placed a gentle hand on each of ours, as if sealing this painful but necessary boundary. Peter glanced at her, guilt and hope clashing in his eyes. He whispered, Emmy? She did not say anything. Her calm compassion spoke volumes. Peter looked back at us, voice frail. Will you ever forgive me? Richard shook his head slowly. Forgiveness isn't for distraction. Reconciliation only comes if you earn it, by the life you choose going forward. Peter nodded. He rose, collapsing on his feet. He drew one last look around the room where he grew up, his childhood spills of forgotten Lego pieces, worn rug, old photo frames, and then turned away. His steps echoed on the hardwood floor, drifting down the hallway and out the door. The front door closed. Silence. Emmy exhaled, squeezing our hands. I swallowed the weight that lifted and settled anew. Richard set down his teacup. That was harder than any courtroom. I nodded, tears slipping unbidden, but necessary. Emmy carefully unfolded the legal document. It's been notarized, witnessed, and signed by each of you. Peter is removed. You two are safe. I looked at her and smiled, tears glistening. Thank you, sweetheart. She nodded. He may return someday, when he's earned that trust, but today, it's your life again. I closed my eyes, feeling a calm I hadn't known in months, a stillness that said I was home inside myself. Later that afternoon I sat comparing old photographs, me holding newborn Peter, the three of us at the cabin, Richard teaching him to ride a bike. Emmy came to sit beside me. Would you like me to fill up this frame? She asked gently, pointing to a blank spot on the mantel. I looked at her, my advocate, my daughter by heart. I nodded. She smiled and went to fetch a new photo, the three of us, smiling in the garden earlier this year. Here, she said quietly. You too deserve that. I accepted it, heart swelling. That evening, Richard and I sat together on the front porch, holding hands as the Colorado wind stirred the pines. The pain of severing ties weighed on us, but the finality brought freedom. We did the right thing, he whispered. I watched the horizon burn in crimson twilight. I breathed in the crisp air. Inside our son's former home, I thought of the memory we lost, but also of the legacy we reclaimed. I leaned into Richard. We are no longer lost in someone else's genetic vanity, I said softly. He touched my cheek, eyes gentle. We were free to build our future. With truth. We sat in companionable silence, the world turning softly around us. The door had closed on a chapter of betrayal, but in that closure, we opened a new one of quiet peace and integrity. And that peace, born from truth, was ours at last. By the time Emmy stepped through the front door, late autumn leaves crackled under her suitcase wheels. She carried hope, not just for a child needing her, but for the idea of home, reborn from the ashes of the betrayal we had survived. After years abroad, completing her doctorate in biomedical research at Oxford and volunteer work in orphanages across Europe, she returned as a fully formed adult, ready to stand where many expected me to fall. "Mama Evelyn," she greeted, voice warm, stepping forward to envelop me in a hug that held promise. "I've missed you." I closed my eyes against the softness of her brown hair, pressed my cheek to hers, and whispered back, "I've missed you too." Richard stood behind us, grinning. Amy's return felt providential, not as a replacement, but as affirmation. Family was more than blood. In the days that followed, the three of us worked side by side in the overgrown garden that had once symbolized all that was broken. We cleared weeds, refilled soil, and replanted seeds of lavender and rosemary, remnants from the day I first brought that bouquet into the house, standing beside grieving parents at Peter's birth. Amy, with steady hands and a tender approach honed in hospital wards, knelt to set heirloom daffodil bulbs in straight rows. I planted a row of roses along the fence, each stem for truth, strength, honor. Richard stood guard with a trowel in hand, scowling at the occasional vine that dared grow wild. He'd inherited my persistence. We spoke little, our silences already fluent, as if the earth itself listened. When dusk arrived, we spread blankets on the patio and shared stories over Coco, her tales from Europe, mine from the months of legal battles. Sometimes we cried, often we laughed. That garden was more than plants. It was a promise of renewal, roots reaching deep into the ground we had reclaimed. And from those roots, a new chapter began. Within months, our home welcomed its first small, uninhibited extras of life. Whiteboards in one room for Emmy's gene editing tutorials, shelves in another for my medical journals and Richard's model train collection. We converted the laundry room into a small clinic area for genetic counseling and community check-ins. Our Sunday afternoons transformed with local mothers who attended our free workshops, teaching them how to access ethical genetic care, how to protect themselves from manipulation, and how to know their family health rights. We opened Hope and Heritage, a cozy nonprofit office fronted by a freshly painted wooden sign, with Hope's first footprints stamped next to ours. There we provided legal referrals, mental health stories, and donated genetic counseling, the kind we wished had existed when I needed it. Beyond our garden and clinic, the section attorney's office moved its case forward. Lisa and Jane, along with the consulting firm's CEO, were indicted on multiple charges: forgery, genetic data tampering, emotional abuse, and risk to a minor's health. The state's attorney called our case a chilling example of where image manipulation crosses into life and death territory. When the verdict came, the courtroom was packed. Lisa was sentenced to 3 years, Jane received 1 year for conspiracy, and the firm's CEO was fined heavily and placed on a healthcare watch list. Peter, who cooperated fully in testimony, his guilt raw and vocal, was spared prison time but banned from practicing in any medical, legal, or advisory role where public trust mattered. The judge noted his son was welcome to seek him out if he ever showed genuine remorse, but only as an adult and after time served. I watched it all happen, with Emmy at my side. It felt surreal, like we had built justice with our hands, our documents, our tears. The baby, our true hero in all this, was born after the peak of the scandal. We'd named her Hope Evelyn Ferrer, after myself and the promise we carried forward. I had never felt that scale of love before. For a child born into truth, not deceit, for a girl who arrived stronger than any lie. One crisp morning, I held her wrapped in my arms beneath a blanket of yellow aspen leaves. Emmy sat nearby, arranging the dolls in a wicker basket. Richard came out, brewed coffee, and stood by the porch rail. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. I nodded, tears shining. "She is." Hope cooed, wide-eyed, her tiny fingers unconsciously tracing my wrinkles. It was as if she already knew the story between us, that her grandmother reclaimed not just her lineage, but her life. On the day Emmy officially filed the adoption papers, I signed them with trembling joy. Hope was legally mine, my granddaughter by birthright, but more meaningly, my daughter by choice and truth. We celebrated with a small ceremony beneath the roses. Emmy stood with us. The judge himself presided, praising our family's recovery from genetic violence to genetic guardianship. Richard beamed. I looked at both of them, old and new daughter, standing side by side. "This," I said softly, This is what I fought for. In the months that followed, Hope grew, laughing, crawling, learning to wave. She toddled through the garden under Grandpa Richard's supervision toward Daddy David, a newly certified counselor who peeked at our door weekly to guide us in parenting after trauma. Life for Hope was simple: love, laughter, learning, and no omissions. My days began with Hope's cries and ended with her hand curled around my finger. I rocked her to sleep at night while reading genetics journals, reminding myself, I am not gen error, I am genetic foundation. Emmy's lab work advanced. She partnered with universities to study maternal protective alleles and consent protocols, our own garden of research. She invited mothers of newborns to join as research participants. She offered open-source tools for families concerned about genetic manipulation. She honored me by listing me as the inspiration behind a yearly scholarship for women in biomedical ethics. Richard? He resumed his volunteer work with trains. He taught Hope how to shunt a caboose. He built a miniature garden train that circled around the rose bushes we planted together. One evening I sat on the patio with Emmy and Hope asleep in her arms. Lanterns glowed around us. The moon rose over the pines. Emmy looked at me, eyes bright. "Mama Evelyn, why didn't you just give up?" "I would have," I admitted, "if I believed my own erasure was okay. But I saw something else, someone they fingerprinted as failure, and I knew she had more life in her." Hope stirred in sleep. Emmy smiled and kissed her head. "You were right," she said. "She's full of life." I tapped my chest where the roses on my locket lay hidden. That rose lives because we chose truth over shame. When I cradle Hope now, tiny fingers gripping mine, I see more than a child. I see survival. I see the consequence of genetic truth. I see what happens when we choose presence over deletion. I turn to Emmy. "Promise me something?" "Anything," she whispers. "If we ever meet another Evelyn, another woman judged by her genes, promise we will give her our voices. Promise we'll remind her she's not error, she's essential." Emmy stands and stretches. "I promise. I am not a gene gone wrong. I am the reason Hope exists, breathing life where it almost faltered, a mother not by blood, but by heart and by choice. Emmy is my daughter. Hope is my daughter. And every morning when Hope tugs on my sweater to wake me, she reminds me that family isn't just who you share genetics with. It's the truth you build together. I am not a gen error. I am the reason this child is alive. And the child I raise is the only one who calls me mother without needing blood." If you stayed until the end of this story, maybe, just maybe, you felt what I felt. The sting of being erased and the quiet power of refusing to disappear. Because this was not a tale of victimhood. It was a map for anyone who has ever been told they are too old, too weak, or just in the way. It was a reminder that no one, no matter their age or scars, deserves to be edited out of their own family. On Grandma True Stories, we do not scream, we remember. We do not beg, we reveal. And when we speak, it is not for pity, it is for clarity. If you believe wisdom matters, if you know silence can hold more than pain, it can hold truth. If you've ever been the invisible one in the room, then this channel is for you. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Click that button, turn on the bell, because when the quietest woman in the family finally speaks, you will not forget what she says. We'll be right here, waiting, watching, remembering. And when the next story comes, be ready. It might be yours.